Hey everybody, Nick here, and this morning I got a review for you of an interesting knife from an interesting brand, and that's this little guy here, the Sanrenmu 7010. This used to be sold as the Sanrenmu 710, but is now 70. They added a 0 in there for some reason, and this very much qualifies for the Thrifty Thursdays competition, given that it is exactly $10 to buy one on the Amazon. So, Sanrenmu is a Chinese brand, and they, interestingly, are actually a company, according to some posts on the Spyderco forums by Sal Blesser. They are one of the companies that makes some of Spyderco's Chinese-made knives. He didn't specify, although he did specify that they weren't making the bird knives, so that's a good thing. But he seems to have some respect for him as a company, and I tend to respect that because of it. And to give you an idea of size here, we're looking at, here's your Spyderco Delica and your Kershaw Cryo. Again, not a very large knife, but it's certainly an interesting one. And so let's go on ahead and jump into the good, the bad, and the ugly of this particular knife. So there's actually a bunch of good here. It's got a very good, very secure lockup. I mean, listen to this. Oh yeah, that's kind of nice. And you can see it locks up exactly at about 50%. Hopefully you can see that. There we go. Secure as all get out, no problem. And that's nice. The design is very nice, although I think I've seen this someplace before. We'll get there. The clip is fairly secure. It's not a incredibly beefy clip, but it feels like it's okay. And more specifically, look at the length on this clip. A longer clip on a smaller knife tends to mean that you've got, well, it'll stay in the pocket a little bit more readily. So that's one thing to keep in mind there. The thumb studs are good. They stick out a fair amount, which is nice, and it's pretty easy to use them to open the knife. And in fact, you can even do a little bit of a flick with it, although I'm having some trouble this morning, apparently. But that's okay. Just trust me there. The ergos are decent. They're not incredible. The clip is a little bit of a hot spot for me, but they're decent. I'm got no real reason to complain too much about the ergos there. One thing that really did impress me about this knife is the pivot quality. So if you take a look at it, I mean, it is a very, very smooth pivot. Once I took it apart, oiled it up. And what's going on here, interestingly, is that there is a fairly thick plastic washer, and then on top of that is a very, very thin bronze washer. And I mean very thin. Like, you know that somebody in this factory sat down and said, okay, guys, how thin can we possibly make the metal washer and yet still have it survive? And that's kind of what happened here. So unlike a knife where the majority of the washer is metal, this is just a little tiny sliver of metal, but it's enough to provide a nice smooth opening. It's not going to be beating any Sebenzas anytime soon, but at the same time, it's plenty nice for a $10 knife. The action here is quite good. So that's impressive. And then the biggest thing that impressed me is that the fit and finish on this is quite damn good. Because you can see here, the screws line up very nicely, for instance. The blade is perfectly centered, which is pretty impressive. And just overall, the grind is nice. Every part of this knife that I look at is pretty damn good. And it's batting way above your $30 knives. And that's kind of an impressive thing for me. In terms of fit and finish, this is done very nicely. And the lock bar is really, the lockup in general is just blowing me away. So that's kind of a beautiful thing, and there's your good. It's got a good, secure lockup, good design, although we'll talk about that. The clip is good, the thumb studs are good, the ergos are fine, the pivot is really smooth, and overall, the fit and finish is quite good. I mean, the only area where it's not really nicely finished is in your lock bar cutout here. So, yeah, and I can live with that. So there's your good. Let's talk about your bad. All right, couple of bad things. First and foremost, the thumb stud, I praised it for having nice long thumb studs, but the problem is, if you can see here, your thumb stud actually sticks out past your scales. And because of the positioning of the clip, it's very easy for your thumb stud to snag on your pants as you're putting into your pocket. This is really made worse by the fact that the clip is only available in one orientation, and that is right side tip down carry. So you can only carry it in such a way that it's hanging down like that. And for me, that's a deal breaker. I really prefer a tip-up carry, and tip-down knives just don't tend to get carried because you take it out of your pocket and you need a separate rotating step. You pull it out, and then you have to flip it around, and then you've got to... And I'm just not a big fan of that extra step. So the tip-down only thing is a big deal for me. You've got no warranty and support here, but mind you, it's a $10 knife, so really not a huge issue. And then the blade steel is 8CR13 MOV, which is barely adequate or barely inadequate, not quite sure which. And well, the important thing here, in a lot of your lower-end Chinese knives, that's questionable whether that's the case, but based on some sharpening and some using, I would buy that this is actually 8CR13 MOV. And we know that they've got 8CR13 MOV in the factory because they work with Spyderco, so I think we can go ahead and trust them there. So the steel is okay. It's not great, but it certainly works. So there's your bad. The thumb studs catch on things. It's tip down only, and there's no real warranty or support, and less than ideal steel. What's your ugly? There's one big ugly thing here, and that is the fact that this design should be very familiar to any kind of knife guy, because it's very heavily inspired by the Chris Reeve knives Small Sebenza. So here's the Small Sebenza, and here is your Sanrenmu. So you can see here that the cutout for the finger is slightly different. The hole has been shifted slightly in this direction. But there are other things that are very, very similar. I mean, look at this contour right here. Very, very similar. Same thing, look at the back here. And it's even to the extent of the asymmetry in the back is still present, which is pretty blatant. You've got a little bit of an upward tick here, a little bit of an upward tick here. One area where they did make a change is in the blade shape. On the Sebenza, it's a continuous sweep, and on this one, they've got a second little line here. But nobody in their right mind can look at this knife and see anything other than, wow, that was a Sebenza. And again, I mean, even if you look at the back side of this thing, it's pretty flagrant. Doesn't quite work with the clip here. But wow, just wow. And that's just no good. I'm not a big fan of clones or of knockoffs, and this isn't a clone per se, because they're not trying to sell it as a Sebenza. They're not trying to claim it. I mean, the materials aren't the same. It's stainless rather than titanium. It's heavier than a Sebenza. The steel isn't the same, but at the same time, anybody in their right mind is going to take one look at this and go, okay, your design process involved a photocopier. And that's just not cool. I really, really wish, because this is such an interesting knife, that they'd taken the time to get a unique design from an actual knife designer out there. But, you know, okay, such is life. But that's the ugly, is that this is just flat out a rip-off of another person's design. What's the final verdict? Final verdict here is that this is a very, very nice knife for $10. I mean, the action is great, the materials are good, it's not too heavy, even though it's steel. It's just nicely put together, the fit and finish is great, and again, at $10, this is really, really hard to beat. And in fact, this is probably, I would be calling this a gem were it not for two issues. First, the tip-down only carry, for me, just knocks it out of gem territory. If you love tip-down, then okay, you can go ahead and disregard this particular rant, but for me, that's just a deal-breaker. The other, and frankly bigger issue, is the fact that this is a design rip-off of your Chris Reeve Sebenza. And, you know, maybe the fancy term is it's an homage, because they're not trying to be a Sebenza, and they've made a couple of little changes, like some texturing and whatnot, but anybody in their right mind is going to take a look at this and go, oh yeah, that's a ripoff. And that's kind of slimy, I gotta be honest with you. I know that there are different views on intellectual property and different cultures, and, you know, the Sebenza design is at this point pretty damned iconic. But, you know, I really, if they'd done this in a design that was actually different and unique, with the same kind of build quality at this same kind of value, I would be blown away. And to be completely honest with you, this would be a great $15 knife. So if $5 is what it takes to hire a good knife designer to make something really good here, I would love that. That I would be, you know, shouting this guy from the freaking rooftops. But as it is, I don't quite know that I can recommend it. I mean, there's a lot of really good here, and as a functional cutting tool, for $10, it's really hard to beat. But the design issue and the tip down only issue are kind of deal breakers for me. And so I'm hoping that Sanrenmu ups their design game, because again, they're doing really good stuff in terms of construction here, particularly for the price. But still, it ain't cool, guys. And I guess that's kind of where I land. So whether or not you should buy this knife, if none of the things I'm raising as objections are problems for you, then go to freaking town, no problem. But for me at least, this one's not going to be making its way into my everyday rotation. I hope this has been helpful for you, and have yourself an absolutely wonderful rest of your day.